Well, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. We've got a truly coast-to-coast audience today, both in Canada and the United States. And so welcome into all our amazing teachers and students for another exciting Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants broadcast. I know we've got some new faces today, and so if you are new to what we do, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world through over 500 live free interactive broadcasts this year, but 500 every single year, featuring every kind of scientist and explorer you can shake a stick at. Now, this week is particularly special. This is our biggest week of the year, and it is because it is World Oceans Week. Now, tomorrow, June 8th, is World Oceans Day, and classically, there were a lot of events centered around that, but it is metamorphosed, it has expanded, it's gone crazy, and now it is a full week of incredible events. And so here in Canada, oceanweekcan.ca is your one-stop shop, 100 plus events happening across the country, amazing resources for you students, and so much more. At Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, we are celebrating with Ocean Week Canada with this link below, and we have even more programs going on with international speakers at our Ocean Week website. So be sure to check those out. We've got everything from sharks to sea horses, octopus to deep sea explorers, and so much more. But today we are continuing our epic Ocean Week Canada series. Yesterday we hung out with Bill Halliday, joining us in Victoria, talking about his work in the Arctic Ocean, and today we are heading back to BC to join with Kate Mussett. Now, Kate is at the Centre for Indigenous Fisheries at UBC. This is a really fairly novel and incredible collaboration between Western science and Indigenous stakeholders and communities to really bring that two-eyed seeing approach to helping conserve wildlife, habitats, and species on our coast. Now, Kate joined us today, having come from Nova Scotia out to BC. We've got classes from both live with us, and so I'm so excited to turn it over to her to explain a little bit more about what she does and why it's such a special part of the world that she calls home now. So, Kate, thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you so much, Jesse. And you can hear me okay?
We can hear you just fine. I'm so excited to dive in. We've got your ocean story up. We are good to go.
Dive in. I love that. So good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much to Jesse and to all of you for being here and for having me, for tuning in today. As Jesse said, my name is Kate Mussett. I am a scientist of settler descent, here to talk to you today about my relationship with the ocean and how it has shaped my education, my career, my life, and so on. So today I am joining you from the traditional unceded territory of the Ktunaxa people in a little town called Fernie, BC, right here where this star is. Some of you may know where that is. I'm a very long way from the ocean here, but the mountains are also a very big part of my life. I love to play in the mountains in all seasons. So that's where life has taken me for the time being. However, also, as Jesse mentioned, I'm also a graduate student at the University of British Columbia on the coast, here where this other star is in Vancouver. And that's where I spend most of my time learning about fish and water and interacting with folks in school there. But my story starts today, as some of you are close to, in my home waters, all the way over on the other coast in a small community just outside of Halifax called Seabright. This is a picture here of St. Margaret's Bay in Seabright on a day that may not look very pretty to you, but this stormy ocean weather is how I most often think about my home waters. And those of you in Nova Scotia know this all too well. The water there is challenging, it is strong, it is exciting, it's dynamic. And for those of you who aren't in Nova Scotia, for context, here's a photo on a much nicer day. If any of you have seen this photo or heard of Peggy's Cove before, this famous lighthouse in Nova Scotia. I grew up just down the road from here, and all the stereotypes of Nova Scotia are true. This background here, that's what it all looks like. So I grew up with a family that was very connected to water. We spent all our time interacting with water, fishing, diving, playing in tidal pools, and learning about ocean life in ways that made so much more sense to me than what I was learning in school at the time. And at the time, I didn't maybe know this, but looking back, I realized that learning comes in all shapes and sizes and often happens when you least expect it. So here's me with my first salmon, same with the photo before. In Seabright, we caught a lot of mackerel, squid, crab, and got a lot of lobster from the fishermen who lived around us. But I had never known salmon until this point. I was in grade 7 here, as I think some of you are as well. My dad and I were on our first ever father-daughter fishing trip in New Brunswick on the Miramichi. And even though I'd been spending all my time with fish growing up, not questioning that relationship at all, it just was who I was. This was the first time I ever really started to consider what that relationship to water and to fish really meant, and what my path in life was meant to be. So many years later, When I was 18, I left Nova Scotia for the West Coast. I ended up at the University of British Columbia in what is now known as Vancouver, BC, on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Stolo, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. And when I left Nova Scotia, I wanted so badly to be in the mountains, to learn more about water and to have new experiences with people who valued their relationships with nature just as much as I did. And when I came to university, I became really interested in anthropology, which is the study of human cultures, or put simply, why we are the way we are. And I really let my curiosity take the driver's seat at this point, and to be honest, still do. And I have to say, if you leave this talk with anything today, I hope it's that, to always let your curiosity drive your path, whether that's education, your career, or life in general. So as I moved through my degree, I started to think a lot about my home waters back in Nova Scotia and how my home waters, forests, and lands had shaped me and my family. And so I started to direct my thinking in school about how a place can shape a person or a family or even a community. And this led me to think about fish and water, as it was so much of what I knew. And so in my undergraduate degree, I did a big project about co-management of fisheries in the Arctic. Inuit peoples, just like other Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island or North America, have incredibly complex knowledge systems that have existed for thousands and thousands of years. And a lot of that knowledge has to do with fishing: what to fish, when to fish, how the fish are doing, how to navigate the waters. They're really the experts. But since the government of Canada and their fishers also rely on fish as a source of income and food, they have to find a way to work together, which is what this infographic is saying. And that's what co-management really means. Unfortunately, and as a lot of us know, the government of Canada has a really ugly past of the treatment of Indigenous peoples and their knowledge systems. And that's what I talked about in this big project. How have we gotten here and how can we fix it? So this photo here shows how the government and Inuit peoples, Métis peoples, Indigenous peoples, or First Nations peoples rather, across Turtle Island or North America are attempting to work together and bring knowledge systems together, Indigenous knowledge with Western science, in order to co-manage, in this case, fisheries, but also other resources. It's definitely not an easy task. So after I finished that big project, I knew where I needed to be. And I bet you're listening to this talk now thinking, Kate, how did you not know that you were meant to be working on the water? Well, that's a great question. And I think about that often, but I sure am glad I found my way back to the water now. So I started to seek out any opportunity that I could to learn about fish, learn from others, and be on the water. So here I am on the left doing some training on how to rescue myself and others from fast-moving water so I could work on rivers. And this other photo is from a project where I helped look at baby salmon and what they eat and where. And this instrument that I'm using is called a velocimeter, and no, that's not a dinosaur. It measures how fast the water is moving. Especially baby salmon find it really difficult to stop and eat when the water is moving really quickly. So that's part of what we looked at in that project. And when I say I took any opportunity, I mean it. When I moved to the mountains here in Fernie, I worked on rivers at coal mines, in rivers far away from any town, in marshes and ponds, and even water deep underground. So on the left, this is a photo of one of the coal mines that I worked at. Kind of pretty, kind of not. And here I am doing some winter fieldwork at a river just outside of one of the mines. But despite how challenging some of these projects and pursuits may have been, I learned a lot of amazing lessons along the way, and ones that I still think about today and I'm trying to find the answer to. And the first big question was really, what about the ocean? Oops, that's a little bit cut off, but it says, what about the ocean? After all that learning and my big realization that I was meant to work for fish and water and the water that raised me, how did I end up working on rivers? And what the heck does that have to do with the ocean? I also found myself in a conflict with science. After my project on co-management in university, where I thought so much about what it means to understand the world around us, and knowing that science is just one of those ways to understand how we interact with the world and why things are the way they are, did I really want to limit myself to one way of seeing the world? And also, if I was really meant to be working for fish and water, should I not be supporting efforts that protect rather than extract or take? So this brought me to the incredible work and journey of my supervisor and mentor, Dr. Andrea Reed, who gave a talk here at Oceans Week last year. Andrea is a citizen of the Nisga'a Nation in northern BC. And in January of 2020, she, alongside some other incredibly hardworking folks, started a group called the Centre for Indigenous Fisheries at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. The center aims to support fish, people, and place by working with and for Indigenous peoples and supporting their rights to their traditional lands and waters. So this is Andrea on the far right. There is me on the left, and in the middle is my incredible colleague and friend, Casey Sterling, an Indigenous biochemist. She's an auntie, she's a beater, she's a storyteller, and many, many more things. So Casey and I currently work with an organization called the First Nations Fisheries Legacy Fund. And they are a partnership of 6 First Nations around the Lower Mainland: Katzie, Kwantlen, Coquitlam, Musqueam, Tsawwassen, and Tsleil-Waututh. And we're working with folks from these nations to bring together science with Indigenous knowledge to help improve the health of salmon and other fish, their habitats, and the waterways they travel. And to do this, we ask questions like this: what is healthy water? And so this might mean, what does it look like? What does it smell like? How does it make you feel? How has your relationship with water changed? How has your access to water changed? And all of these things have to do with how healthy waterways are. So there's no one way to answer this question. We've tried our best to learn as much as possible from water, from people, and to help find a solution to the unfortunately poor state of health a lot of these waterways are in. So to do this, we collect information about food for salmon. We measure how the water behaves. We look at what the water is made up of, but we also talk with lots of people from the First Nations we work with to ask about how they engage with these waterways, what sorts of relationship they have to fish and water, and how they have or continue to protect and support the health of water. So I want to go back to these questions for a minute. After all that I've worked through and the work that Casey and I are still doing, what about the ocean? All I've talked about is fresh water. Well, my answer is this: water follows us everywhere we go, from coast to coast to coast, in Canada at least, from rivers to lakes. Even when it rains, all water is connected in some form or another. And protecting water means protecting all water, all fish, all people. And while our changing climate is having a really scary effect on our environment and our waterways, I found that the most important role for us is to stand behind or with, when invited, the original stewards of the lands and waters that we live on today. Not to mention, working for salmon means protecting all the water they travel, which is the ocean and the rivers. So I'm starting to come to terms a little bit with how much I work with freshwater. And I'll always have my home, which is the most important thing. And as for my conflict with science, I think I'll always be trying to sort that out, as I think a lot of us will be. And there will always be a place for science in my life, as there currently is in the work that I do and the way that I interact with the world around me. But the most important role for non-Indigenous scientists like myself at this point is making space for all the other amazing ways of understanding the world, measuring health, and making sense of our place in it all. So with that, I want to say thank you. There's me and Casey on the water doing fieldwork for our project. I will take any questions, or I can leave my email with folks too if anyone wants to follow up. And that's all I had to say. Thank you so much.
Fantastic, Kate. Well, thank you so much. If you want to come out and screen share again, I know that takes a little bit with the way we set it up, so I'll give you a minute to do that so we can have a bit of a conversation. Welcome in on YouTube to our teachers there, Chute Lake and Truro Middle School. So nice to have you guys in live, and I'm excited to dive in with Q&A. So put your thinking caps on. Any questions you want to ask are free game over the next 20 minutes or so. YouTube, feel free to share in the chat, and I'll pass along as many as I can over our next little bit together. Kate, before we dive in with our class questions, I'll give them a second to think. Is there a favorite part of your job? This is something we get in almost every program that we do. Is there something that really jumps out to you every day when you get up in the morning, you go to work, whatever that may be? Is there something that really speaks to you?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, obviously I love spending time on the water. And I think some of my favorite days are when it's really, really gross outside, when it's hailing sideways, because I always sing Barrett's Privateers or other Stan Rogers, and it helps me get through the day. So it makes me feel like a true Nova Scotian when things are rough and I'm out there on the water. That's probably my favorite.
I love that. Thank you so much. Truro Middle School, welcome into Nova Scotia, guys. You're about as far as you can be across Canada from Kate right now, but if you have a question, come on in and share away. Hey, guys. Hello.
I have a question. I always have lots of questions. I'm their teacher.
Perfect.
Hi.
Hi.
So you are from Nova Scotia, from St. Margaret's Bay area. Mm-hmm. So when you did you were starting your educational journey, and we're all experimenting with the camera. You said you went directly to BC. Did you do an undergrad in Nova Scotia? Did you like start with a Bachelor of Science? I'm just thinking for those who really think your job is cool, they kind of wanted to follow in your footsteps. What kind of things would they have to do?
Yeah.
Yeah, I left Nova Scotia and did my undergrad at UBC as well. So I haven't left UBC in all of my degrees now that I'm doing my master's. But it was definitely kind of an interesting path. And maybe I should have spoken to that a little bit more. But I started in anthropology. Actually, when I first got to university, I started in theater, but that didn't last very long. But I started in anthropology because I was just really interested, as I said, in like the ways that our environments shape who we are as people and our families and our communities. And so I started in a very social science kind of realm, which is not a common path, I think, for a lot of people. I'm now doing a master's in science, and most people will have an undergrad in biology or some other like environmental sciences. And I think the biggest thing that I've learned is that like there's no one path when it comes to science. And as science is kind of like breaking open and we're making way for different types of thinking and different ways of knowing, people are becoming more accepting of different paths. Science isn't as linear as it used to be, or the path to science. So that's why I said, like, you should really let your curiosity drive your education, because I think if I had forced myself into science coming out of high school, where I, to be honest, didn't really enjoy science because of the way that it was taught to me, I think I wouldn't be here today. So I think the path can be very different. Yeah.
And I really love this message. This is something that we're getting from more and more of our speakers, both in terms of the academic disciplines that they end up in. Actually, it's funny you mentioned theater. I know it was short-lived, but theater is a really common avenue to science now. People, you're open to all sorts of new things. You understand that things could go wrong. It's a nice backdrop. Artistic people tend to do really well in the sciences. And so I encourage that for all our students, like whatever you're passionate about now, follow that. But it's not only that, it's when you get into science, there are careers that are really neat in those fields that aren't necessarily involving you having to have a PhD. We've had Antarctic researchers on the last little bit, and they talk about the fact that they need engineers and cooks and drivers and all sorts of things that allow them to be in these special places and do this work to help out the scientific enterprise without having that intense, 15-year academic study background. And so I'm really glad you mentioned all that, Kate. Let's head to Shoot Lake Elementary, right down the road from you guys, all things considered there in BC. You guys want to unmute your mic, Miss Miller's class? You were there. I don't know where you are, but if you want to, oh, there you are. Hi, unmute your mic if you have a question for us. And you can leave your mic unmuted too. There you go. Hi.
Okay, hi, hello from Kelowna. We've got our whole class here, and we are thinking about the oceans and your passion for the oceans. And I'm wondering what you think is like the biggest thing that people can do, just the everyday person. What can we do to help protect our oceans?
Nice.
That's a really good question, and a question that I get a lot. And usually my answer to that question, usually I talk about the work that Indigenous peoples may be doing in wherever you're living, and learning more about the efforts that are being carried out in that place and what you can do to support. But I think another really great one is ocean cleanups, which I know is something people say a lot, but getting people together or just doing it solo or with your family, or it doesn't have to be ocean cleanups, it can be lakes and river cleanups as well, is a really great way to learn more about how the waterways in wherever you're living are interacting, how they're being affected by plastics and by trash. And it's really fulfilling. So I think that's a really great way. But usually my go-to is to really think about the history of First Nations and Indigenous people that are living in the areas that you're in and what they may or may not be doing to support those waterways.
Fantastic. And for those classes that are keen on cleanups, Oceanwise, a partner we bring on many, many times here as an organization, they run, I think, the world's biggest shoreline cleanup. So certainly shorelinecleanup.org/CA. We've got Canadian classrooms. If you want to register your own class, if you want to join ones that are already active, they have a slew of amazing resources, but that's a really fantastic program to do that. And Debris Tracker is a whole citizen science project that anyone can get involved in, chart the things they find, and that really does help actual researchers do their work while you're cleaning up in the process. So how do you beat that? Kate, you talked about this sort of disconnect earlier between Indigenous knowledge Western science, sort of this troubled history that we have, is there a place in Canada where we're doing it well? Now, BC jumps to mind for me. I know by virtue of the fact that you have the Centre for Indigenous Fisheries, there's been this huge push to do more stuff like this and foster these collaborations. Are there other examples we can point to in Canada to say, yes, that's a great example of this sort of joint effort in science?
Yeah, that's a tricky question, because I think like it's still a really difficult path, and every instance, every project, so to speak, is different and has different hurdles to overcome. So one of people always talk about weaving or braiding knowledge systems because one can't be tracked onto another. They have places where they overlap, or instances where they overlap, and they have instances where they're dissimilar. And those dissimilar places are the best instances for us to learn what's best for the people, the place, wildlife, etc. But one thing I didn't really touch on is this whole idea of two-eyed seeing, which Dr. Andrea Reed, my supervisor, talks about a lot, and is this the idea that was brought about by Dr. Albert Marshall. He's a Mi'kmaq elder in Nova Scotia. It basically talks about ways in which you can see with the strengths of one eye being Western science, while seeing with the strengths of the other being Indigenous knowledge for the benefit of all. So by covering one eye, you're not getting the whole picture. And so there are a lot of instances where using two-eyed seeing in ecological projects, whether that be for water or trees or wildlife, have been really successful. And Andrea and Elder Albert Marshall and a bunch of others have written a couple of really great papers about instances where those have come together really nicely, which I would be happy to send you, Jesse, and to others so that folks can give that a read.
That would be lovely. Certainly, Andrew is one of the favorite people I've ever had on the broadcast. So always nice to hear her name. And yeah, I'd love to share more resources with our classes. Speaking of whom, let's head back to our live classes for some questions. Truro Middle School, whether students or teacher, if you guys have another question for us, come on in, unmute that mic. Hey, guys.
Des questions? Est-ce qu'on a des questions? Moi, j'ai toujours des questions. We're a French immersion class, so
Yes, don't worry. I figured.
So I have another question. I'm always full of questions. They might not be, but you were mentioning about fisheries across Canada. So here in Nova Scotia, you might have seen on the news that it is sometimes a little bit challenging for our government and our Indigenous populations to, we'll say, come to an agreement on how they wish to do things. Do you feel like maybe some of the projects that you're doing on the West Coast and possibly bringing that aspect of two-eyed seeing to the forefront would help our situation on the East Coast?
Yeah, great question.
Yeah, that is a great question, a very loaded question. Yeah, I've been following what's been going on in Nova Scotia for a long time, and it's definitely really sad and really complicated. And I think that now that, and as I kind of mentioned when I was talking before, like now that so many people rely so heavily on fishing for income, for food, for a livelihood, it's not as easy to find that common ground, but it's obviously really necessary. But people are so emotionally vested in these fisheries that it obviously makes things really complicated. But to answer your question, yeah, I think that bringing these like aspects of two-eyed seeing to situations like the lobster fishery in Nova Scotia would be really beneficial. But I think it obviously takes a lot of cooperation, which is kind of the backbone of weaving knowledge systems or interacting with knowledge systems is cooperation. But it's a little bit easier said than done, obviously. But I'm really hoping to see some positive change in that aspect soon enough.
I love that nuanced answer. That is a very difficult question, and one that I was kind of hoping would be brought up, actually. And so, again, a lot of these things start with collaboration and with compassion, just understanding where each other are coming from. I think we're starting to see the inroads of that, but it takes longer than it need to in certain places. So thank you for that question, guys. Shoot Lake Elementary, if you guys have another question, come on in. YouTube folks, if you guys have anything to share, please do feel free. But let's head back to Ms. Miller's class. Hey, guys. Unmute, come see us. You can keep your mic unmuted, everybody. You're good.
It's not Mrs. Miller anymore. She's gone. It's Miss Creighton now.
Perfect.
I had a student asking a little bit about salmon, and do you want to come and ask your question? She wanted to know, you can come stand with me.
Hi
She wanted
there.
to know, hi. She wanted to know a little bit about how we could, or how two-eyed seeing is helpful for protecting the salmon. And here in Kelowna, we have kokanee salmon, not the inland, more inland salmon, not the big ocean salmon. But like,
Yeah, we love
how
it.
could that?
Great question, by the way, and hello.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. Okay, I want to start by saying I am not a salmon expert. I am still on the learning journey with salmon. But that is a really, really great question. And again, to plug my supervisor, Dr. Andrea Reed, this is exactly the work that she does and has done throughout her career. So salmon is a really great example of how two-eyed seeing can work, because kind of like, as I was talking about in my talk before, where Casey and I are measuring things like available food for salmon and how water is moving and what the water is made up of from a very Western science perspective. So one eye that paints part of the picture. But then when it comes to salmon, which are a keystone species for so many First Nations across Canada, the United States, across Turtle Island as a whole, some of that knowledge is thousands and thousands and thousands of years old. And so Indigenous peoples have knowledge of patterns of how stocks are running and signs of stock decline or stock improvement or diseases that may be present or methods for fishing that are better than ones that Western science is using. So it's about using, kind of like tools like that. So there are tools in Western science that can be used to answer one part of the question, where Indigenous knowledge can answer other parts of the question. And as I said before, sometimes those things overlap and we find that both knowledge systems are saying the same thing, but sometimes there's differing responses. So someone may say, like in the context of my work, Western science may say, the salmon are doing really well, the river is really healthy. And the nation whose traditional territory the river is on may say, actually, the salmon aren't doing so well. And so the question then becomes, how do we come to terms with that gap in knowledge? And for the most part, I would say siding with the knowledge that has been around for 10,000 plus years is the way that I go. But yeah.
I love that question, and I love the answer. We had a program with Parks Canada, the Case of the Missing Salmon, literally from Kluane National Park in the Yukon, talking about this very thing. So we had a sort of scientist from Parks Canada. We had an elder there from the community. It was a really special program. So I have put it in the chat on YouTube and for our live StreamYard classes. If you guys want to learn more about this and follow up with that question a little more, because it's a topic that we keep coming back to. Salmon are so, as you mentioned, Kate, so important to so many communities. They're sort of the aquatic equivalent of some of our seals in the north, of bison in the plains, these animals that are really tied to community survival and culture in the west coast of Canada. So thank you very much for sharing that, Shoot Lake. Kate, we already asked about sort of the academic journey, but I'm curious if there are any additional resources, books or web links or websites or anything that you'd really recommend for our students to keep the learning going, get excited about this, anything that you're particularly keen on, I'd love to share.
Yeah, definitely. Wow, there's like a lot of things actually going through my mind right now about that. No, that's okay. I'm just trying to think of something that's not a textbook, because since I did an undergrad in anthropology, this is why I'm not a salmon expert, is because I didn't do a science degree. So I've been trying to learn a lot about salmon. But Jesse, how about this? I will have to send you some titles, send you some resources that you can share with everybody.
Perfect. I would love that. We'll absolutely get that to all our registered classes, so you guys can stay tuned. Again, if you're live on YouTube, we'll make sure you have everything. Kate, as we come near the end of the broadcast, time flies and you're having fun. Is there a last message about this, about your approach, about the Center for Indigenous Fisheries that we want to leave all our classes with today? And I'll make sure they have the link to that center in the minute after you're done answering. But anything that we should really take home message from today's program?
Yeah, and I think the best take-home message is the one that I am still learning and probably always will. It is to keep an open mind and to be kind and compassionate, because at the end of the day, we're all here interacting with water, with trees, with wildlife, with the land in general. And so keeping an open mind and being curious and doing the things that you're passionate about, I think is really going to help solve some of the problems that we're facing today.
Fantastic. I love that message. That's amazing. Kate, as I said, I'm going to bring this up for everyone. I put this in both the chats. If you want to learn more about the Center for Indigenous Fisheries, some of Kate's amazing colleagues, more about Kate and her work and what they're doing out at UBC, do check that out. It's a really fantastic thing. I've been thrilled to see it come to fruition over the last few years, and I'm so excited for you guys to learn about it as well. And again, this is Oceans Week here in Canada. So if you want to hear about 100+ events across the country, all the amazing speakers for our Ocean Week Canada series, and so much more, check out oceanweekcan.ca. Kate, thank you so much for joining us. I know it's your first time joining us, and so what we do to wrap up every broadcast, at YouTube, I can almost hear them from at home. We'll bring in our Truro Middle School and Shoot Lake Elementary. If you folks want to unmute your mic and join me in saying a big thank you and farewell to Kate, you are in the broadcast. Thank you so much, everybody.